Want to learn about public policy with a group of curious fellow learners? Apply for the 12-week graduate certificate in public policy. Early bird deadline closes 27th July.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to All Things Policy. I'm Suman, your host for today. I hope everyone's having a good day and are reading and listening to interesting things. Recently, I read something that gave me much food for thought on a topic that's very close to my heart: the female labor force participation rate in India. The numbers, the differences, the reasons for them, all of them make for a very interesting study. We track many metrics while assessing the economy. Some of them are GDP growth, inflation rate, manufacturing index, and employment. Employment numbers or employment rate or unemployment rate indicate the state of economy, of course, but they can also help us understand society in different ways. The female labor force participation rate is particularly important when studying women in the workforce and generally other gender-related issues. In the recent past, this metric has been a worry area for both economists and people interested in the topic alike. Okay, so this measurement of women in the labor force presents unique challenges for surveyors and can have serious policy implications. To discuss this important topic, I have today's scholars, Sarika Choudhary, Amaresh Dubey, and Surbhi Malhotra, who have co-authored paper along with Wendy Olsen. The paper is titled Visualizing the Invisible and discusses this important issues and offers solutions to possible ways of measurement and tells us a lot about how this thing is actually discussed in policy circles. Welcome to the show, everybody. And let's begin with one round of introduction. Sarika, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm Sarika. I'm doing my PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University, and I'm also a research associate at CSAP.
Welcome.
In the sequence, Suman has said I should come in. I'm Amaresh Dubey. I have been professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University until about a year ago. And I was teaching economics in the Center for Study of Regional Development. And since then, I moved on, and now I am affiliated to the Center for Social and Economic Progress, which is a think tank. And there's a lot of work on all kind of policy issues, not only economic policy, but other related policy issues. And this particular work that you are referring to, that is the reason why you organized this podcast. Thank you very much for your interest in our work. Then these are the two young women who have done basically the heavy lifting, and therefore I will hand it over to them, and I will sit back and relax and listen to them peacefully.
Surbhi, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Surbhi, and I'm working as a research associate at Asian Development Bank at present, and I'm working with time use surveys. So time use surveys bring to light women's invisible work, and that is one aspect that we have looked at in this paper. So we'll be discussing more in the
Sure. Welcome everybody to All Things Policy. Welcome to the Takshashila network itself. I'm happy to reach out to more people who are outside our network, and we should have these conversations going. Otherwise, it becomes a small group discussing the same thing with the same views, right? So it's great to have you on this show, and we'll delve straight away into the paper itself. So before we go into specifics, for our listeners, I'd like one of you to just explain the lay of the land, like how do we discuss employment itself in terms of what is total population, working age population, and therefore labor force participation, and within that, formal and informal women's and all other kinds of permutations, combinations that we can see. So one of you could just go ahead.
So when we started working, the first part was the way the data is put out. That is, these are the government data. This records employment in various forms, actually. And that's where in one of the issues that is important is to understand, one, what is work and how it is then quantified to come up to what is the numbers or statistics that we know employment, or its other side is unemployment, that is those who are seeking or I am seeking and available for work is unemployment. Now, the growing economy, which was predominantly subsistence economy, where agriculture used to be the largest contributor to the GDP, which also was perhaps one of the reasons that the work is something that one of these, Sarika or Surbhi could elaborate more on what they understand by work and how it is measured. Essentially, for some gainful employment, work is something which just contributes to the economic activity or contributes and is paid for. That is work for wages or profit. So that's broadly is what it is. But the measurement issue around the work has been somewhat challenging for developing economies in general, and India in particular, because of its predominant seasonal rain-fed agriculture. So the amount of work that is available for the population always used to be seasonal, and the current status of the measurement of work or the way it is assigned, and there are a whole lot of norms and prescriptions. It was for the first time codified by M.L. Dantwala way back in early 70s. And he came up with the concept of one is the full-time work or employment for a day, which would typically now is understood as 8 hours a day. But he has also introduced or brought in something called the subsidiary work. So given the structure of the economy and given the kind of work that was available, so there was subsidiary, and the work is also measured in parts. Unlike the modern economic measurement of work in working in office, full-time employment, etc. So that is what has gone into the creation of the instrument that captures this work in India. And there are people who do not only one work, they do several work. And it's basically time spent criteria. Okay. So, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Dubey. Sarika, you want to just give definitions or Surbhi?
For any analysis on employment, we first begin with the total population, which includes everybody which is in a country, regardless of their age or activity that they're doing. So we always start with total population. From this, we try to identify working age population. Officially in PLFS, typically it is considered those who are age 15 and above.
Yeah, PLFS is Periodic Labor Force Survey.
Yeah, okay. PLFS is Periodic Labor Force Survey. It's so common for us that we forget. Yeah. I got it. So basically, in Periodic Labor Force Survey, it is generally working age population is identified as 15 years and above. However, for our analysis, we used 18 to 67. Generally, nowadays, there is a significant rise in school enrollment for those between 15 and 18 years. So we took criteria as minimum age as 18. In our paper, it is 18 to 67 as working age population. And within this group, like 18 to 67, there are those who are economically active and those who are not. So in those who are currently economically active, there are two. Which forms the labor force. First is those who are currently employed and those who are currently unemployed but actively looking for work. So these together forms labor force participation. There are several methods to calculate labor force participation rate. For our analysis, we have looked at usual status, which is generally calculated using in a year how many days you work. And there are two components to it. One is principal component. This is based on if person did work, if majority part of the year, like if you have worked for 6 months and above, you will be considered employed in principal status. But if you are not employed for the 6 months, you will be considered unemployed or out of labor force, there it is important to bring seasonality, the Professor Dubey was talking about. So here subsidiary activity comes in, and those who are unemployed by principal status but have worked for 30 days or above in a year, they are considered employed in subsidiary status. Bringing these two together, we have usual status. For this paper, we have relied on these usual status as our measure of employment. And for time use survey, I think Surbhi would be better.
What is the number?
If we look at the trends, I was thinking that we'll go with the trends together, but let's look at the PLFS numbers. If we look at PLFS numbers, we have found that labor force participation rate for male has been consistent. It is around 84% to 91% between the year 1993 to 2022-23. So many decades for male, it is consistent around 80 to 90% for these working age population. However, for female, it has fluctuated quite substantially. It was around 44.9% in 93-94, which has declined to 25.7% in 2017-18, and it has again risen to 40% in 23-24. So these have been trend over the years. We have also calculated absolute numbers, but
we can refer it to in the paper too, right? Yeah. Thank you so much. That gives us a kind of indication as to where this discussion is headed. As it is in India, we have an employment problem as such. The number of people outside the workforce are still very high. And even within the labor force, as we call it, people who are actively employed as well as seeking employment. I mean, even without going into stability of income and quantum of income, it is a worrying metric. Generally, employment in India is a worrying metric. Within that, if we look at, again, women, we have seen differences. And I think your paper is trying to tell us why these differences exist and, what we can do. Yeah, Surbhi, so you want to go ahead and explain what you did differently in this paper so that, at least we get the methodology as to why you did what you did.
So there are different ways, as Sarika mentioned, to measure employment. And when we use the periodic labor force surveys or the unemployment surveys, they basically look at one aspect of employment. That is, whether the person was doing any income generating activity, as Professor Dubey also mentioned. If there is an income generating activity, that would be considered as employment under the PLFS surveys. But when we look at the fact that women in India and elsewhere also in the world, they do a lot of activities that are for final consumption. They produce goods which are for final consumption, which is not taken in account in the employment-unemployment surveys, at least in the Indian context. So we have tried to do this using the time use survey, which takes into consideration the SNA proportion, the SNA production activities. In the SNA production activities,
can you explain SNA?
So SNA is basically System of National Accounts. And in that, we have three major categories of work that are considered as work. That is, one is the employment activities that PLFS also takes into account. The other one is the production of goods for own final use. For example, if a woman the wheat is produced now, she is grinding it. But she is grinding it for the purposes of her own final consumption. Okay, she is fetching water. She's collecting firewood, or even a man, even if they are doing it, then that part should also be considered as work. Because if, for example, we go out and buy wheat, that part is considered as economic. But when the person is doing it itself in the home for home production, that part is generally not counted in the labor force surveys.
Yeah, so I think because of the movement away from subsistence economy or subsistence activities, this measurement thing is that why this thing has come about?
So subsistence activities are the activities, most of the activities that we consider for own use production are subsistence activities. For example, milking of cow for own use. This kind of activity we don't account for in labor force surveys, but they would be taken into consideration in the time use survey, in the SNA activities. And for example, another form of work that is considered is volunteer work. So for example, you're doing a podcast, right? If you take help from a neighbor, to maybe fix something. So that is, and you don't pay that person. But that part of work is also counted as work in the SNA activities. So, it is important when we take into consideration all these activities, then women's labor force participation jumps. Okay. Not just women's, even men's jumps. Mostly in the rural areas, because of course the subsistence activities, more fetching of water, collecting of firewood, that is being done in the rural areas, and volunteering work is, very small proportion of the total work that is done. So some form of volunteering are not considered as SNA; they are considered outside SNA. But I'm not focusing on that right now because this is particularly about employment. So I'm just focusing on the volunteering work that is for employment. So, for example, if we look at the rural part, there is a 10 percentage point increase for urban women when we look at the employment rates. And there is about, the rural women's labor force participation doubles when we consider these kinds of activities. So it is important to, take into consideration the intermittent works that women are doing.
Yeah. I think in the social structure that we are in, where women are not actually going out to work, it becomes all the more difficult, all the more, and therefore all the more important to measure this, because women are doing work. It is just not quantified in terms of money or in terms of wages, as we call it. Right? So you have looked at time use surveys. I mean, you have been mentioning about time use surveys a bit. Could you tell our listeners what is a time use survey? Because I know you know, but for benefit of everybody, what does a time use survey do, and why is it important when we are measuring something like this?
So what happens is, for example, I come to your house and I ask you, what did you do in the previous day? So from 4 a.m. in the morning, Indian time use surveys like that, but different surveys can collect it in different ways. So it is a 24-hour diary that I would ask you to give me the account of. So, for example, what were you doing from 4 to 4:30, from 4:30 to 5, from 5 to 5:30, and so on for 24 hours. So I will record each and every activity that you did. Mm-hmm. So, for example, you tell me that I was sleeping. Okay. I went in to buy groceries. I went in to cook. I went into doing some cleaning. Each and every activity that you describe in that 30-minute period would be recorded. Okay. So what happens is, for example, you told me 45 activities in a day that you had done. And there were some repetitions. For example, you cooked breakfast, you cooked lunch, and then you cooked dinner. So each time you give, for example, 30 minutes. So the total cooking time that would come out to be would be 1 hour, 30 minutes in the day that you are spending. So for the entire population, we calculated this way that, we calculate the number of activities that person has done and then club the numbers. And, that's how we get these proportions and these numbers and the averages. But
Now I see why this is more important when measuring FLFPR in contrast to PLFS, because the PLFS is just asking a very direct, simple question saying, what was your employment status in the last 6 months? Whereas this is actually recording your day in some sense, right? So I think now I get why this is important, and therefore why you have to use this instead or complementary to the PLFS itself, right? So moving on. So if we are talking about this, so I think we are kind of getting to the limitations of the other surveys, but can you just explain a little more about why you chose, either of you can do this, why you chose to study this, and what are limitations around other surveys, and therefore you had to, build your own kind of methodology of sorts.
I think Sarika will be able to.
I think I will come in. Actually, it's not just us. There is a global recognition that employment classification needs to be updated. In fact, in October 2018, the International Labour Organization adopted a system called the International Classification of Status of Employment 2018, which is ICSI 18. And which is not yet adopted in Indian context, in PLFS context. And this paper is actually arguing that if we adopt this new international standard, there would be better capturing of work, particularly for women, but across it will be better to be able to capture work in Indian context, particularly for women, informal and gig workers. All of these category will be better captured if we adopt ICSI 18 classification. So through this paper, we are trying to suggest that in Indian context, PLFS should adopt the new standards ICSI 18, where we are pointing out three main issues. One is, of course, that many of the productive activity of women is not recognized, which Surbhi have pointed out, which like if you are doing domestic work, and like if you are producing sugar, pickle, clothes, all of these in home, it will not be counted. So we are arguing that this should be counted, and it is also in ICSI 18.
One question, when you talk about measuring, or when you're talking about measuring production of these kind of goods, sugar, whatever, do you mean this is again for own use, or do you mean this is a little more expanded for everybody?
Suppose if you are working in family run businesses, so one person would be counted as worker, those who are selling, going in the market, but there are a lot in the family who are helping in the production of that. So will that be counted or not? Since they are not paid, they are not counted as worker, but instead of that, they should be counted as worker. That's what it is. The second aspect, which is generally missing, is within the family household business, is the decision making. Generally, in the current survey, it simply asks whether you work in the family business. If you're unpaid, you go into unpaid employment. But if their role is in decision making, they should be counted as employed. So this is the second issue that we have pointed out. And finally, there is the issue of casual worker, gig worker, piece worker. These are all lumped together in PLFS. So our understanding is all of these should be broken down, like those who are casual, paid in hours. If you get piecework employment, you are paid in one go for one work. And all of this, there is one new category of worker called dependent employer. So dependent employer are generally those whose work depends on if somebody else's get work or not. In any village society, suppose that somebody is working as in the production of some good like saris, and these saris have to be ultimately sent to the households, and those households actually do the stitching and everything. So if that person gets contract for saris, then only these women will get employment. So these are called dependent contractor. So these minute details in employment needs to be taken care of in PLFS, which is not right now. So these questions, which are not there in the PLFS, if these questions are added regarding whether how they are going to get work, what is the nature of employment, if these are added, then we will have a better understanding of these kind of work, which is gig employment and unpaid family labor, self-employment.
Sure. Thanks. So you've put all of this together. You have tried to synthesize gig worker, piece worker, casual worker, etc. But I'm guessing there is a legal distinction between casual worker, gig worker, and piece worker or so. If there is, then won't it be counted somewhere, and should we treat it differently?
Yeah. That's what we are pointing out, that these should be treated differently, but which is not right now in PLFS.
Okay, but they are legal. I'm guessing casual labor will have like something related to a minimum wage, whereas piece rate workers will not have a minimum wage. They are just paid by the piece. Is that right?
Casual workers are generally paid by hour or day. And piece worker are generally paid by unit they produce. So this is
so the concept of minimum wage does not.
That should apply to everybody, but I don't know.
Okay. Yeah. So now that you have brought all of this into measuring the female labor force participation, right? Can you just, for our listeners, just highlight the numbers as to how much it has increased by and what are.
Okay, in our study, if we adopt all of these definitions, changes in PLFS, we found that for men, those who are inactive will decline from 12.1% to 8%. So there is 4% drop. For women, it will drop from 58.8, which is inactive population. It is 58.8 right now, and it will decline to 52.9%. So there is a 6% decline in inactive population. In basically the activity or those who are employed will increase by 6%, putting it differently.
So that number is 44% is?
Yes.
So our female labor force participation rate, if we include your methodology, will move to about 44%, right?
Yeah. From so that 42 to 48.
48, yeah. Okay. Yeah, if it was 44, it would have been 60, I guess. Yeah. So 42 to 48%. That's where we are. Okay, this sounds great in terms of actually, actual number of people who are, the way we are measuring, etc. But is there a larger policy or, sure, measurement is one thing, definitely. But what about policy implications, or what is it that we can do to, first of all, better recognize this thing? One thing is show measurement, but I think a lot of it is societal in terms of what you consider work, who is given greater role or whatever. But the fact that women make decisions in family-run businesses, the fact that they are actually in the time use, they are spending a lot of time doing things other than household chores that they're doing, means that a lot of their time goes in working, actually. So should we then stop saying that our female labor force participation rate is low, or should we then stop saying that it's not a cause for concern?
In some way, a hypothetical question. Women traditionally, I mean, as you're asking about the numbers, so one of the things about women employment, first, it was very low. And the reason was more of a cultural and the kind of work that was available. And also, over time, in fact, the systematic statistics on employment, women employment and men employment both, has been available since 1973-74. And until about 2017-18, there has been a secular decline in proportion of women, which is known as WPR for women, has been going down. It is only after 2017-18 that curve has started picking up, and now it seems to be going northward. So the employment, as the new opportunities for employment and expansion of education across the board. In fact, women, even in places like JNU, as Sarika and Surbhi would testify to it, that there are more number of women coming and enrolling in higher education than it used to be earlier. And the work available accordingly in non-primary sector, where it is the kind of work that education provides access to. And therefore, it's increasing now. And one could, of course, go into a little more details of which are the major sectors that where the women employment is increasing. And that's a question of numbers. And one of these, Sarika could be having that. And if you can share it, or if you can just read it out.
Okay. Actually, if we distinguish between rural and urban, actually in rural areas, in 93-94 in millions, it was 92 millions for female, those who were in the labor market. It increased to 115 million in 2004-05. Then it was declining throughout. In 2017-18, it declined to 75.8. And in 2022-23, it has increased to 134 million. So from 2017-18 to 2022-23, there is an increase in number of women in the labor force. This is simple PLFS, not our estimation based on ICSI 18.
Yeah.
But one thing I would say that if we distinguish between rural and urban, the female in the employment is extremely low. It starts in 93-94, it is 16.6 million, which has increased throughout, and it has gone to 48 million in 2023-24. So if we distinguish between rural and urban, there is one thing that in our rural area, there is always a participation that is seasonal, that you go into agriculture and come out. That's there. But for female, it is not the case. So whenever you are employed in urban area, it is somewhat better paid work employment. If we just talk about PLFS, not the ICSI 18. So the question that you asked, that should we concern about low female labor force participation, I would say yes. Despite change in method, despite keeping the previous method, there is one thing, that there is a huge gap between male and female. For both male and female, it is increasing, and for female, it's increasing a bit more than male if we adopt our method, but it's still far behind the male's labor force participation. So, in my understanding, there is a lot for policymakers and those who are concerned with female labor force participation to think through why female are not actively taking part in what is considered as paid employment or the productive employment.
The other thing that comes across to me, I mean, I'll come back to you, is because you said rural urban. I think a lot of it is stress driven, in the sense that if there is a crisis, then the women go out to work, and the crisis is seen more in the agrarian sector. So when they see that crisis, you see women going out to work, and therefore that could be a reason for increase in rural areas. Am I right with that assumption, or with that thinking?
Yeah, I think so. It's generally there has been a linkage between economic uncertainty and women labor force participation, as women are generally considered as reserve army of labor. If you take Marxist terminology, then whenever there is need to bring them into the active labor force, you have them there. But the question that I was raising is that overburden of care work to female. That is an important aspect where the policy maker needs to think thoroughly. If that burden is reduced a bit, there is a chances of female participating in a much better way than what they are doing right now. So one aspect is that, and the other aspect is demand side constraints. So generally economy needs to have more employment generating activity to be able.
Yeah, that is the larger challenge, I guess.
Yeah, both of these are important challenge if we look at women labor force participation or women's work in the economy. These two are, in my opinion, important.
Yeah, thanks, Sarika. That was really insightful, in the sense that just because we see a little bit of an increase in measurement does not mean that everything is really hunky-dory with the female labor force participation rate. Surbhi, you have something to add on this?
Yes. So Sarika has very nicely, put together these 2 points that, on one hand, we need to recognize that women are working, firstly, that, they are doing the domestic work, they're doing the care work, they're doing the volunteering work, all the work that is not visible in the traditional labor force surveys, women are doing that. And when we look at the total work combined, in most countries, it is women who are doing more than 50% of the total work that is being done. So first is recognizing that the women are doing work. Then it is to redistribute, and then, reduce and redistribute. This is ILO's 3R policy to, bring to light that women are doing work. And then again, looking at the demand side constraints that Sarika mentioned, it is important to generate those income generating activities which, women can participate into. For example, in other countries, if we see, which have, better policies, like paid parental leave policies are there. So it is mandatory for the husband also to participate in care work. Otherwise, that leave is wasted. For example, in Sweden, Finland, these countries have those paid parental leaves. So these kinds of policies we need in India also. Although it is difficult, although the formal employment is only 10-12%, but it will be a step in the right direction. At
least it sets the agenda for everybody else. Yeah. Right. I mean, reducing unpaid work for women and demand side employment generation or whatever, that is true. I mean, demand side employment generation, I would lay it at the step of the government saying, okay, do more manufacturing. I mean, even with our manufacturing, because the path to greater employment is agriculture to manufacturing to services or whatever. We seem to have skipped the manufacturing part. And if you see everywhere, especially China, if you look at, you see that women went to factories to work. I mean, of course, there are other issues on factory girls and whatever, I mean, without looking at it, but it just moved a lot of people into manufacturing. And that is where, a lot of things change for women. And a lot of times we try to, we're trying to box in the policy thing, saying that, oh, maybe if women do work at home, like we say garments or whatever, they can do work at home. But my point of view is that women need to get out of home to do work. Okay, this work from home is a different that's a different issue altogether, and it concerns a very, very minuscule part of the population. So let's not even go there. But I'm saying generally for women in everywhere, if they get out of work, I think it is better for themselves. It's better for their families, societies, all of that, right? So a lot of it, yes, is government policy and stuff like that. A third lever that we tend to miss out is mostly social change. A lot of it lies with society at large. How much the government intervenes in society, that is, I'm not so much for that. But yeah, as social change movements, etc., will hopefully gather some change, gather some momentum, and we will see more women in the labor force. So yeah, that is about what I had. If you have anything else to add to this, either of you all, please feel free. And if you have any other major takeaways that you want to highlight from all the work that you have done, we'd be happy to hear.
One point I would like to mention that I think I missed is that infrastructure development, policies to develop infrastructure can be really helpful for women's labor force participation. So, for instance, there is this Jal Jeevan mission, and there are starting figures which are starting to come in, then saying that 10% reduction in the households who are going to collect water, because of the provision of tap water. So infrastructure projects can also help women to actually participate in the labor market, because now they have free time. So, joint policies focusing both on infrastructure as well as on the demand side generating employment. So combination of these policies is required to actually improve the female.
I think if I want to go back one step, I think basic law and order. Just take care of law and order, and taking care of a lot of things. Public transport, all of those public goods or provision of public goods, I think is, like basic thing that the government should do, which will actually bring up labor force participation. Yeah.
I'll add to your point that in my opinion, government can intervene in several ways in society and social change. If you basically what you pointed out, that we need social change, but I think social change can take two ways, like from government side also, from from up or from below. But one thing definitely I'll agree to you, that public spaces need to be more accessible to women, which happens when there is manufacturing sector. And if in manufacturing sector, if the participation is both male, female, then these public spaces becomes equally accessible for both genders. So somehow if we do not have these, that's why we see public spaces mostly occupied by male, which ultimately leads to unsafe public space. So women labor force participation, particularly outside the home, is not just important for increasing your female labor force participation, economic activity, but also for making public spaces accessible to both the genders. So that point, I'll totally agree with you.
Thanks, Sarika. Is there anything else on the paper that you would like to highlight?
No, I think that's it. We would just request, if possible, to include all of these changes that we have suggested in our paper, in the PLFS survey and the discussion, I hope.
Yeah. So to sum up, the three things that you have said is include decision making. The decision making question should be modified to ask the better question. 2, gig work, casual work, and piecework should be treated separately. Yeah, I think these two are major ones that you spoke of.
No, productive labor should be counted, which is not
counted. So that is those three things in the measurement. Professor Dubey, you want to add the last few points before we close?
No, I do recognize that I'm in minority and I should not be coming in, especially the two of my students who are such a staunch supporter of proactive policies towards facilitating women employment. Just the only thing that I want to add here is that, in fact, some of these social changes and all, howsoever the policy proactive is, they take time to change. You cannot change somebody's mind or somebody's thought process in a short period. It's not, the social change is not something that is going to happen overnight or that's going to happen at a flick of a button. So a whole lot of it, including women getting into manufacturing or those kind of work, is always, wherever, in fact, the agriculture was the primary activity center, or was the primary activity which required a lot of physical labor. And therefore, there were very few women in the labor force in the history years or historically. Now, because there are these technological changes are happening, which doesn't distinguish between which hand is touching the button.
Yeah.
And that's where the quality comes in. So whether it is a manufacturing or non-manufacturing, wherever there is more and more technological input, that technology doesn't distinguish between men and women, the employment will certainly increase.
Yeah, sure. I think all of it is pointing towards structural transformation of the economy, which will only go, which will move.
Yeah, and once again, that is time taking. It's going to take a whole lot of time.
Yeah, but for the short term, I think we are just talking about data and how we can actually try to visualize women's work and their dignity.
If we get regular data on how many women are in what kind of thing, I think it gives policymakers very important leads as to where the economic activity should be pushed towards or what we can do towards it. So I think in that sense, measurement is very, very important. And I think you guys have done fantastic work with this paper. So thank you for putting this out and thank you for joining me in today's episode. And I hope I'll read more from you in the future and we can have more conversations on everything that you write. Thank you for joining, all of you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.